Joining us from here in Doha is Zeidon Alkinani. He's an analyst on Iraq politics. Zeidon, welcome to the program. At the bottom line, what is the message that we can draw from these protests, do you think?
Well, as you rightfully mentioned, the current protests are led by the pro-Iran factions under the PMF. However, it's not all of the factions under the PMF, as there are many groups in the umbrella organization that are not affiliated with Iran. But the protests themselves today are protests that are led by supporters of the pro-Iran camp in Iraqi politics, and they're challenging an accumulation of many defeats. Most recently, the major electoral defeat that the parties that are affiliated with these groups in the early elections last October, which also led them to another crisis where they failed to convince the leader of the Sadrist movement to create a consensus government with them instead of a majority government. And then they lost another battle where their appeal, which was rejected by the Supreme Court, where they claimed the elections were rigged. So the accumulation of these these defeats is what pushed them to signify their strength and presence on the streets as they're preparing themselves for a 1 million protest in remembrance of the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and Mohandes, which took place on January 3rd, 2020. So there are three main messages they would like to send.
Right, let me just jump in there. Just moving forward, how can the government manage this? How can they build bridges?
Well, the government has been struggling a lot in managing such type of protest or marches. These groups are not approaching the political system or the government for the first time. A few weeks ago, it was the very same groups that most reports believe that they attacked the house of the prime minister. What the government can do now is just wait for the government to be formed, because they know it's a current government, although a lot of sources claim that the Sadrist movement might push for Prime Minister Kadhimi for another term. But they are dealing with the messages here. They know it's not really something that they're actually planning to do or actually attacking the foreign forces or the U.S. forces, as they always claim to do. The main messages here is that they still enjoy a powerful fan base across the country. It's messages to the Sadrist movement that they want to be a part of a consensus government instead of a majority government. They are ensuring that the martyr character of Soleimani and Mohandes is still very significant in their political identity. And it's also an opportunity to convince their followers and supporters that the elections is not the end goal for them to be in the government. There are also different ways of pressuring the upcoming cabinet or the upcoming prime minister to include them in a consensus government.
To what degree is what is going on is fueled by the economic situation?
Not really. I wouldn't believe the economic situation is very related here. These protests are very politicized. They are led and administered by political groups and armed groups that themselves attacked protesters from the October protest movement that were dominated or oriented and motivated by unemployment rates, political sectarianism and security issues. So I would be very careful with comparing the protests today from these armed groups and the protests of actual civil society activists that have been taking place since October 2019.
We're at the beginning of a new year. Do you see these protests and this kind of protests gaining momentum?
Not as it used to be. I'm seeing the momentum of the pro-Iran groups within the PMF extremely decreasing since the October protest movement. As we mentioned, they were a major part of the political violence that was conducted against these protesters. And the electoral defeat is a great reflection of their extremely decreasing popularity across the country. They can get hundreds of thousands of people protesting, but they will never be able to whitewash or wash away the memories of the political violence that they committed against civil society activists and activists and protesters since October 2019 and way before that. I think the negotiations between the Sadrist movement and the Fatah bloc and the state of law and all the coordination framework parties might take weeks, if not months, to name a prime minister. However, I don't believe it will it will leave a major reflective pressure on the government as it used to be before October 2019.
Zeidon Alkinani, we appreciate your perspective. Thanks very much indeed.